So Stu, thanks for joining today.
Matt, it's a pleasure, and thank you for making sure we color coordinated.
Yeah.
For anyone on YouTube will notice that, but nobody
Yes,
listening. But
this is very intentional. And next time we'll get the whiteboard too, so we'll be all set.
I know,
100%. Yeah. We'll do the
totally.
intros and outros in unison. So, welcome to the podcast. So yeah. Uh, so Stu, so people who aren't familiar with you, you've done some pretty amazing things. You've built this incredible company, Type.ai. Maybe just familiarize everyone with what that company is, what you provide. It's a phenomenal writing tool. I'm now saying it, but let's hear it in your words.
Great. Well, you nailed it. I describe it as a writing tool, writing product. There's a million of these, it seems like nowadays, an AI assisted writing tool or product. But from the very beginning, our vision for Type has always been that AI is assistive to the writing process, not kind of a replacement for the human in the loop. So we've built Type to be a very familiar tool that kind of looks like maybe some hybrid between Google Docs and Notion. You'll kind of know how to use it right when you get your hands on it, but in a way that surfaces the latest and greatest in LLMs to help you write, to help you edit, to help you ideate, basically to help with kind of like the 1,000 paper cuts that can make you drop off on a piece of writing. We think AI can be really assistive and helpful there, but I'm not going to sit here and lie and say it makes writing easy. It's still tough, but I think it makes it like a little bit easier. So that's at a super high level what we're building and, the problem that we care about.
I like what you said about assist, because I wrote out my questions here for today's podcast using Type, and it's very much there, but it's not in your way. And I can see that's a very intentional design choice you've made, that I think we're moving in a direction where a lot of people think the future of AI writing is to kind of almost overly hover over you during the process so you don't feel like you can clearly think. Whereas I felt like I can write, but then it's out of the way when I need it, but it's there when I need it too, if that makes sense.
That's it. And we had started to play around with OpenAI's kind of GPT-3 right before ChatGPT came out. We were just toying around with this new, strange alien technology. And we thought about the writing use case. It's funny, chat wasn't at all the paradigm we thought of. Almost all of our ideas were, clearly, as a writer, you want a document editor type of interface where you're, more than anything, you're encouraged to type in that empty box. And then when you get stuck, that's when you want the AI to kind of appear and be assistive. But really, like, the first place you should be as a doc editor is the familiar writing tool that we've honed in the software world for the last few decades. But of course, the paper equivalent or the analog equivalent is pen and paper. That's what you want. And then the AI stuff is kind of this add-on that can show up in a handful of different ways alongside it. So that's always been kind of where we started. And chat has become a much bigger part of it. And there's a really great place for that, especially with ideation. But we've tried to keep very open-minded as to, well, okay, if you start with writing as the problem you care about, and you start with the writer as the person you care about, it does reframe how you see AI's place in the process. You do versus like, what's cool about AI? And,
Right.
How do we make the AI particularly amazing? It's a little bit different. It's like, how do we make writing great? And where does AI fit into that? So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about the problem.
Well, yeah, it's kind of focusing on the classic position that the writer finds themselves in, augmenting that process rather than saying, oh, we've got all these cool AI features. How can we force a user to rethink how they write? And kind of what you were saying, I don't know, maybe this is silly, but I was just thinking right now, like, in a sense, the blank paper is how we've communicated through all of civilization. The very first caveman writing on a wall had to start with a blank wall. There was like no instruction. So we're using the same thing. We're just increasing. So it's there now to help define this process.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, with that, the other thing that is more natural for us is to kind of like start on a draft ourselves. I mean, you're the one with the comedy expertise here, but it's almost like jotting down the premise, like jotting down the premise of something is just the instinctual place to go. I think writing the crappy first draft of a joke is almost like where you want to start the process versus if you were just like, I don't know, in some sort of chat paradigm where you have to like, nothing happens until you've given instructions to the AI. It just feels like it doesn't harmonize with the creative process. I think if you're a painter, you're going to do the first few strokes. then maybe, oh, you screwed something up and you need to do some corrective measure. If you're a writer, I think often you want to jot down the first few words, then get the assistant. So like the blank page to me, like the canvas, the whatever the equivalent is, the mic standing there waiting for the comedian to take it. It's like, that's always been the starting point. And like the creative person taking the first shot, I don't know, strikes me as like where most folks want to start.
No, it's a really great point. And you're right. All of great writing and art in that way is very iterative in that sense. You're kind of starting with something a bit, you have an idea of where you want to go, and then you keep sharpening it, sharpening it, sharpening it. And you actually have that as one of the tools in Type AI. It actually is just improve. You can just click improve.
Exactly.
Something I'm curious about is how do we as writers maintain our own voice and still use AI as there's no way this is not going to be a part of the future. I think some people are still in a delusional state where they don't think AI is going to be a part of every aspect of our lives, but notably how we communicate. But how do we look at communication in the future as we have these tools? How much of it is us speaking? How much of it is the AI speaking? This is a whole new paradigm we've never had to deal with before.
Yeah, and it's one that like hopefully any honest person will say they don't have it figured out.
Yeah.
Don't have it figured out, because that's definitely how I feel, and definitely I think the state of the world we're all in. I think we had talked a little bit about like this is a field where most of us have 0 years of experience, almost including the folks who invented this stuff. It's even
That's even the most surprised for some reason.
Exactly.
Sorry for you don't know. Good luck, everyone. Yeah,
it's totally true. Like
yeah.
this was not the bet that anyone was making 10 years ago, really. Everyone thought, oh, the robots will be mowing our lawn before it's writing our tweets, you know?
Yeah.
So this is like, okay, so actually the order has been totally reversed, and like that's really funky and weird and surprising. So who knows where it shakes out? Like the state of the world today, as I see it, is that one, humans are fundamentally interested in what each other think. Therefore, there is an inherent value in being able to communicate what you think and communicate it well. So it's funny, even though I probably GPT-4 or whatever the latest and greatest model is, probably actually knows more about the world than some people I might even ask the same question to. But I think we tend to have some basic curiosity and trust maybe in other people and people we deem as credible or experienced or whatever, knowledgeable on a topic. So that's one, is that like, for at least the foreseeable future, we want to hear from another human, their experience with something, their knowledge on blah, blah, blah. So in that world, I think we inherently want to know that something's coming from a person, and not in every case, and not, I think that there's not some blanket rule that doesn't mean that couldn't be eaten away at slowly with AI or whatever. But as I see the world today, it's like that's strongly, that remains. And I think that's more true in more creative pursuits. Like I think of the Olympics or something. Why don't we have invented steroids and drugs that can make you freakishly strong. When it comes to something like wrestling or martial arts or something, we've invented like robots that can battle each other with way more impressive weaponry than the human hands, right?
Yeah.
And yet, what do? We want to watch two humans push the forefront of what humans can do, even though it's frankly way less impressive than what
a great
battle bot could do. So anyways,
they had some BattleBots shows that got kind of big for a little while. It's like I remember they're like these flamethrower robots and they destruct each other. But you're right, like we don't get quite as excited as watching a human compete with a human.
No, it's wild. And I think there's a place for both, right? But it's like, yeah, a good fist fight is probably twice as compelling to us than a UFC fight or whatever than BattleBots. There's some primitive nature where we want to know what's the real edge of expertise and skill that someone can reach as a human who's not, quote unquote cheating or whatever. So I think that's like more true of creative pursuits where AI is going to be like, there'll be a ton of AI generated content that I think is interesting, but we're going to have this inherent respect and curiosity about what's the funniest human and like, what are their jokes?
Yeah. And you're right. It's an interesting thing because it'll up the bar for what we expect out of writing, right? I mean, we're going to kind of have a base level where you should be using some kind of AI tool and then from there communicating that way. But I guess the most elegant direction, I think this is what you're building, is that it's not creating more technical tasks for us to be creative. It's allowing us just to be purely creative. And the technical difficulties are easier to implement. Is that kind of a fair characterization?
I think you said it earlier with like, iterative being this very important word where the friction between idea and implementation is what's going to get really drastically reduced. And what I think AI could be particularly great for is generating a bunch of variations of something. And then you're kind of picking, okay, that's kind of the direction I want to go in,
Right.
versus you having to do that. Literally down to things like finding a synonym, right? Just finding the perfect word, quickly getting a few really creative suggestions. Obviously, we already have like thesauruses, but the slightly more sophisticated version of that, just seeing these micro improvements in your writing and all the stuff that takes a surprising amount of energy and time as a human when you're doing it, but they're the details that matter because they're the building blocks of a great joke, of a great screenplay. You think of a TV show like The Sopranos or something, like the writing is divine because they nail the details
Yeah.
and they build this world, and every little thing is what contributes to this much broader experience of The Sopranos. And so that to me is what really excites me. And I think is the practical reality is AI speeds up a lot of that. It can be fun, but it's often a lot of drudgery. And the role of the human is shifting. Our editorial skills, I think, kind of become, maybe there's a bigger premium on them than purely our vocabulary, like recall, those sorts of tasks.
And it's going to probably empower new people to be great writers who maybe weren't great writers, which is a fascinating concept. We might hear very eloquent stories and narratives from people who maybe never could write. They always kind of hit a certain mental block, or like you said, maybe they didn't have the vocab or the ability, the grasp on grammar, but now suddenly they have this ability to articulate potentially very brilliant ideas.
Oh yeah, and that was, I mean, even before kind of the newer models from OpenAI, even like the earlier GPT-3 models, one thing you'd often hear, and still today, is like, look at this crap. This is so boring to read. Like, this AI stuff there's not an ounce of humanity in it. But my reaction was always, have you read the median person's writing? Have you read half the drafts that I've written in my notebook? Those are bad.
Right.
That's bad writing. It's interesting because it's bad for maybe interesting reasons or whatever, surprising ways, but it's bad. And actually most people, it's almost like I think it's kind of a snobby belief, if you will. Like most people aren't great writers, and inherently being great with language, I think is like it's a weird proclivity in the same way that some folks are born with a real visual eye, or some folks are born with like a strong musical or mathematical sense. I think there's something with language too, that some people have that gene from early on and they don't need the help, but there's a huge percentage of people who this could get them to a great baseline, if nothing else, and hopefully propel them into producing really great stuff that otherwise would be a medium they either struggle with or are excluded from entirely. So that excites me as well, is, helping those folks tell their story and communicate clearly.
And something that I think you're doing, and this is something we need, is also, it's all about idea starters and understanding direction, right? Because I think when people complain that AI doesn't write well, in a sense, it's really just that the person hasn't been able to articulate using the models. They just kind of entered in, write a rejection letter, which I'm thinking specifically of because I applied for a job once and I got a rejection letter and it just said, "We regret to inform you something," and that just said job title. Like they forgot to even reply. In the brackets, they forgot to put the actual job title that I was being rejected for. And you could just feel the stale. I guess if you're being rejected, you're not spending a lot of time on that letter. But you could see that it's not really the AI's fault that something is dry. If you understand how to write, you'll get it. You'll be able to refine it to a point where it still is compelling.
Yes, and this is the kind of other half of this, is that a lot of what ends up showing up in the form of writing, a lot of what ends up on the page often starts off of it, and often is like the thinking process or the lived experience process or the whatever. And actually one of, I think, the more overlooked and extremely exciting applications of these tools is, for lack of a better word, the brainstorming partner. But this is something you can converse with. It's non-judgmental, which I actually think is a huge deal. If you want to bounce off some ideas or test out a personal story or even talk about something sensitive, most people don't have a trusted collaborator they can call up at 1 a.m. when they're doing their writing to bounce an idea off of, or to have ask them questions to pull out an idea, or give them live feedback on their work. And actually a lot of that stuff, maybe it doesn't even happen on the page necessarily, but these tools can do now with reasonable fidelity. They lack a little bit of depth and but it's so different than whatever Siri, 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Unreal the difference we've seen in such a short duration.
Exactly right. So that to me is the other half, where it's like even folks who struggle for um, other reasons that aren't necessarily about finding the right words or getting the grammar right. They struggle because they're like, what should I even talk about in the first place? What's the unique life experience I've had that's worth sharing? I think it's really fun to, talk with the freaking chatbot, see if that can spark some inspiration, like as it becomes better.
How much do you do that? Because it's funny you mentioned that. I do that exact same thing. And I'm amazed how much of my life I now interact with AI just for idea generation, just to bounce a thought off of like whatever it is, personal life, business, travel plans, just random thoughts in the middle of the night. I'm just using it as a way, not that I'm expecting it to come up with the definitive answer, but just as a way to bounce off, just to almost uncover my own thoughts with more depth.
That to me is like the workflow. And I mean, maybe this is embarrassing to admit because it almost sounds somewhat trivial, but when I do that, often the most valuable thing I get is just like a refresher on the basics of the thing I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So if I'm like, okay, we're announcing something at Type, and like, okay, when you announce something, like you actually want to think about what your goals are.
Right.
What do you want people to react? How do you want people to react to this announcement? Who is this announcement for? Is it for existing customers? Is it for, the whole world at large to generate some excitement around Type? What action should the people who see this announcement take? Do you want them to go try the product? Do you want them to go try the feature? Like, these things sound kind of basic, but in the rush of a given day, when you're sitting down at 4 p.m. to like start to draft something up, you actually kind of like have to reprime yourself. Like, oh yeah, what goes into a great announcement? Or if you're writing a cold outreach email, like, how do you do that well? That's where I found these tools to be kind of amazing. You can just chat it out, if you will, with the AI, and it's prompting you a little bit, but really what it's doing is just it's getting you back in your lane, getting you back in the lane and the state of mind to accomplish a goal that I think if I'm left to my own devices, I find a little bit tougher to do totally solo. So that's this more subtle benefit I found.
I saw something very bizarre the other day. I'm forgetting what it was called. I'll send you a link, or the people listening to this. It's a podcast. It was an actual podcast, kind of like this, and it analyzed the page, and then it had I guess two perspectives of AI discussing the actual thing, and it sounded just like this, just like we're talking right now, very casual. And this is all. It's nuts, and this is just within a couple of years of having seen these tools emerge really in the mainstream, and it just gets me thinking. In the future, we might have a situation where, say, as a writer or as a business person or anything, you maybe consult with your team of AI. Like, you're not just getting one perspective from it, but perhaps you have 5 different perspectives. You program in different perspectives, one with a certain set of views, another set of views, and then you just check with the panel. I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's going to be the greatest tool for propelling us into higher quality stuff, or the greatest nightmare of overthinkers everywhere.
Yeah. Every single decision. You're not sure which candy bar to order. It's giving all the different. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, because seriously, I try to keep myself honest, right? When I use these tools, including our own. Okay, how much of this was actually useful, and how much was like, you're writing the book, but before you write the first word, you got to buy 15 new notebooks to find out the perfect one for your. It's really just clever procrastination. It's like, that's definitely a problem. And I remember there was a craze around kind of like note-taking apps a few years ago where people had these bi-directional links, building their second brain. It was this corner of Twitter that I couldn't seem to escape. And one of the stated goals was like, if you have a much more rigorous note-taking process as powered by these new tools, when you sit down to actually go write, you'll be able to pull from your favorite highlights of every book you've ever read, your notes to yourself that are most resonant on this topic. And man, the freaking thing will be half written by the time you even start to draft it.
Right.
And what would happen? I mean, I would go to the profiles, to the blogs of the people sharing these great insights, and what would I see? I would see absolutely nothing. They hadn't published anything in 6 months. So I'm like a little skeptical that these note-taking tools are doing all that much if you're not showing up and shipping. So there is some like a lot of AI is cool in the same way that a dog riding a unicycle is cool right now.
I've never heard that comparison.
Yes.
I like the analogy though. Yeah.
I know. I've shamelessly stolen it from someone at, I think, Anthropic, where
that's a great.
You're going to be amazed, right? You're going to be like, you're never going to look away. How cool is that? But when you like get home, you're going to be like, well, okay, that's not terribly useful.
Right.
So there is this like, there's these infinitely interesting hypotheticals and this tougher filter that I think everyone's figuring out right now on where is it really practical and where am I going to find myself going back to it every day. Because a lot of dogs on unicycles and only a few dogs that are, watchdogs that are actually valuable or whatever. So that's another dance I find myself doing.
Well, let me ask you this, because we have a world now with type and with so many other tools where no one technically should have any errors in their writing, theoretically speaking, right? Even just with Grammarly, you should technically always have a perfectly drafted email. Yet there's sometimes something kind of refreshing when we text each other or write to each other. There's a certain beauty in the imperfection. How do you see that fitting in? And is there like I don't know. Do you think there'll be a way where that's kind of implemented by design, or are we just going to see a sort of disappearing of that, where we just are more eloquent as communicators? I don't know. It's like a kind of a weird new world we're all entering into.
I really could see it going either way, and I don't have a great answer here, but like I've always thought writing and most creative mediums, the rules should always be in service of and secondary to the goal or the real thing you're trying to do, which in the case of writing often is to communicate a message effectively. And with writing, like often you want to communicate something like a sense of rhythm or feeling as though the person is speaking it to you instead of writing it formally is really important in relaying the message. And like the rules of grammar don't always account for that. There's also like slang and vernacular that groups develop and that you don't want stripped out just because Oxford Dictionary doesn't know what it is or whatever. So there's this kind of individual identity aspect to language where, you take what's in the dictionary and modify it for your use. And then there is this like objective-based approach to writing where, sometimes you got to freaking break the rules to say something interesting, not because you're breaking the rules for its own sake, but because the message that would get in the way of your message. And so like, I don't know if you're writing some long-winded, like jokey type of insult or something, it'd be funny to have like a 50-word sentence, run-on sentence, because it would recreate the experience of someone rambling or whatever. And you break 3 grammar rules, but it could be really funny. And so anyways, like my hope is that these systems get smart enough and our desire as humans is strong enough to want to support those, our individuality basically and the flexibility of language. And so that's my hope, obviously, is that these systems learn that. And I think they are. I've noticed that newer models seem to like not slap you on the wrist quite as strongly as the old ones. And if you ask it to change something, they'll keep a lot of your voice in it. But of course, door number 2 is we're all using the same model. It's trying to be perfect for everyone. And as a result, it just comes across as very vanilla and generic.
What do you think in terms of, I guess I have a 2-part question. How do you think when we're diving from the same source of information now, when we use these models, it's all of basically human knowledge effectively. How do we maintain our own unique voices in that atmosphere? And the second is curious to hear your thoughts on just the comedy side of it. Like, it's not that funny yet, AI.
No.
It'll be funny potentially.
It's such a shame that it's not. Like, it's funny in that you can get it to do and say things that are funny because a computer is saying or doing it, but not funny in the sense of funny that we mean. So that's a shame. I think with the voice and style thing, it's almost like there's got to be like a better way of saying this, but like the market will hopefully almost handle that itself. Meaning, I don't want to viewers of TV shows don't want to watch something that feels very generic or like the last thing they watched. Certainly attendees at comedy shows seeing 5 people perform definitely don't want 5 bad Seinfeld impersonators or what have you.
What's the deal?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. One airline food joke, will do. We can't have 5 in a row or whatever. So my hope is that it just that there's almost just the pull inherently within humans, the people consuming or reading or whatever, where it's like, I think already, right, we poo-poo a little bit if something comes across as, this is pretty vanilla, this is pretty generic. Like, did ChatGPT write this? Is almost like a slur or like an insult.
Oh yeah, it's common.
And I think that's good. Like, that's how it should be. There should be this negative reaction. So that's my hope is like, the humans just won't use any AI stuff that doesn't really feel like they have an element of them in them. And then B, the companies building these models will understand just the spectrum of use case they need to support.
What's to that point when we kind of know when something's been strictly written by AI and we sort of use it as a joke or a put down almost. But what about when someone is thoughtfully using AI, when they are using type? How do we distinguish between how much the person wrote and how much the AI wrote? And I know that these tools are floating around out there now that are, AI detector tools, and they'll estimate whether it was written by a human or not. Are those even going to be relevant? What does that look like? What does that landscape look like to you?
It's fun. That's like a point that I found myself like having a different opinion on really early. And who knows if I'm right or wrong, but my sense is that, what's the best way of putting this? I hate for it to sound so mechanical, but it's almost like if you go to a bakery or something, I don't know enough about baking to make this analogy really good, but you don't really need to know or care like if the sugar was processed by that baker or someone else. You're going to the baker because they're the best synthesizer of those things, and they're putting their name on it, and when you get it, it's what you hoped for, and like it's awesome. And so I think with writing, there's, again, probably a better analogy there, but like the important thing is you're putting your name on it, and how much you used AI to be assistive is totally secondary to what the end result is. Does the person reading the thing really feel like they've gotten value? If that's the case, and you've put your name on it, you've been the curator, and you've kind of like approved and put your stamp on everything in the draft, that's what matters. The AI stuff, we'll just get used to it, and it'll be like, of course you used AI. You wouldn't, you would not use spell check if you were writing something. Yeah. Why wouldn't you not use AI to help write this a little bit faster? So that's my sense, is like we care a lot now because we're like a little bit spooked by it. But over time, it'll just be more a question of, well, did I get value from this thing? And what's this, what's the reputation of the person putting their name on it?
I think that's a great point. You're right. Right now, we're sort of scared of the unfamiliarity of this. So people are trying to run it through detectors and try to determine, oh, well, this had AI, therefore it's rejected. But you're right. At a certain point, it's going to be so synonymous. It'll be such a part of everything we do that it'll just be the final product. It'll just be, was that good writing or not? However you got there, yeah?
Yeah, that's my sense. And maybe it's more prevalent in like the visual arts or something. Like, like there's a lot of like subtle CGI and stuff in movies and in TV shows. And I don't think most audience members care all too much. I can see this, there being some exceptions or whatever. But like, is this movie like Mission Impossible where Tom Cruise did his own stunts? I mean, that's like really cool that he did. But if someone's watching an action movie where maybe it was not as bold of a lead actor, I don't think they're worried too much about how much of those explosions did they really blow up a building, and how much you're just like, all right, there was a cool explosion and like a really great story unfolding.
You just walk out of the movie. That wasn't real.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't actually blow up. Godzilla didn't actually trample that whole city. Like, this movie sucks.
I only watch movies that they actually build Godzilla. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, like, it's the Christopher Nolan approach.
Right. No, but you're right. Yeah, that's a great point. So you're right. I think people will look less at the tool, more at what the actual output is, and just kind of use that as the metric. Let me ask you this. This is something that is sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Massive companies implementing AI into everything. You've got Gemini, Copilot, Apple Intelligence, etc. You're one of the breed of the bold, the AI startups. How do you stand your ground and your positioning in a marketplace where the behemoths are going in with a feeding frenzy to try to take everything they can right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, on paper, this is probably the stupidest mission I've ever been on. From a sheer, like,
I respect it though. It takes gut.
From the 30,000 foot view or whatever, that's exactly right. Incumbents are adding this stuff to all their products. First of all, this is one of the first technological shifts where like the old, the dinosaurs actually are paying attention and actually are moving very fast. And so in that sense, why in the world would you ever want to go compete? The startup rule of thumb is you always go somewhere where they're not going to compete, get something big enough that they have to buy you at the end of the day just to get an edge, but you snuck ahead 5 years earlier. That's not happening in AI at all. My hunch, though, my strong hunch is there's a hell of a lot more marketing and perception and like the view of the market from the strategic lens ends up looking very different than the view on the ground. And what I mean by that is, Google Docs is adding AI to their product.
Yep.
We've known that since day one. All of our customers know that. All of our customers know about ChatGPT. All of our customers, many of them have Apple products and have Apple Intelligence, and yet they're still using our product. And to me, that's so interesting. Like, why is that? And our thesis, and now we're seeing it play out a little bit, is that AI is going to enable new workflows in ways that are subtle and familiar, but also totally different and really weird and new that end up being a lot more valuable. And it's so much easier to make these bigger bets when you don't have a billion monthly active users you have to take along with you. Startups have the luxury of Google Docs can't radically change their interface tomorrow,
Right.
just given how many people depend on it staying ballpark where it is today. So startups can just take bigger bets, and AI is going to enable really big changes, I think, in some creative work. So that's one, is it's more incentives than technology is what I mean to say there. We have certain constraints that they don't. The other thing is just like, I don't know. I just don't think there's like a product manager at every one of these companies who cares enough to do something really radical and new. I think it's, again, more of an incentives problem. I think it's going to be startups who, like, for every 1,000 that try, only one will punch through, but who just have like a creative spin on how this technology should be used, that creates something that's just useful enough to where people will switch from their existing tools to integrate their product. So it's a very long-winded answer, but it's like, I think startups, yes, they've won when incumbents overlook a market, but they also win when they just approach it more creatively and a lot more quickly. That's a story as old as time as well. So that's kind of like our bet.
No, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because as a startup, you can take risks, you can take chances, you can move swiftly, you can adapt. And I think the large established players, they very often have a lot of liability concerns. They're afraid to make a change. They're afraid to spook their existing users. I think I saw an article where Google was talking about this, that they feel they effectively invented a lot of these technologies, but they were kind of sitting on it because they were afraid of inaccurate information propagating out there. So they couldn't take the chances that were necessary to sort of, basically OpenAI and others came in as a result of their kind of sitting on the tech themselves. I'm not sure exactly.
We've already forgot OpenAI is a startup.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, they're not anymore. They have billions in funding and over 1,000 people or whatever. But we totally forget. Wait a minute, like, they're new,
they just popped up now, basically. Yeah,
totally. And they've been at it for a while or whatever. But they really only cracked this thing that Google, literally invented 2 years before they even really started working on it. And that we should keep in mind. That's like my view is like, hey, we just saw the birth of what's now going to be a $150 billion company in this next fundraise. That kind of like didn't come from nowhere. It had been around, but like shouldn't exist, right? If you go through incumbent strategy, Google invented this technology, had all the compute, all the money, all the talent, first and foremost. And yet, why the hell does ChatGPT exist? Why does Notion exist when Microsoft Office
That's a really
exists?
great point. There really should be no reason for Notion to have taken off, but it did.
Absolutely. So there's always, I think, these gaps that exist in markets where incumbents are already aware, but they just don't have the incentives. They don't have the vision. They don't have the the time of day to care enough. That's where startups thrive. That's where they blossom. So that's the momentum we're feeling.
It's really well said. What's the optimal type user in that sense? Because obviously Google and the other big players are going to be sort of casting a wide net. They're going to try to get every user to use AI. And I know people I talk to now at this day and age, they're kicking and screaming like, I don't want to use AI, but you're going to use it. So just strap up and get ready. But like, what's your sort of targeting? Do you see type as something that is for everyone? Is it more for your novelists, your blog writers, your script writers? Like, what is there a specific region you're going for?
So there's two things. There's kind of like two qualifiers that probably make like the ideal customer. One is a kind of like psychographic thing. The other is more the business case for why certain folks are better customers than others. But the fundamental one is this someone who could write without us? That's actually who I think our best customer is, because like we started with, type is very assistive. It's more for people who already have to write a lot, typically for work or some sort of professional role. But they could have done it without us, but they know they could do it a little bit faster with AI, but they want final say. They want total control. That's really our sweet spot, and we've built it for those folks. We do have a lot of people who hate writing and don't like to do it, and therefore the AIs, you would intuitively think that'd be more useful, like that's where it'd be maximally useful.
Right.
But we just feel like we understand the person who does write, has some basic skill there, just wants to speed up that process a bit. The other half, from a business perspective, it's definitely easier to get someone who has an ROI attached to their writing, someone for whom their writing generates income for themselves, helps to grow a business, helps to grow their audience, whatever, versus someone who's maybe just doing kind of writing as a hobby or creative outlet. It's like really freaking hard to get a hobby novelist to shell out $15 a month.
Right.
But if you're a marketer or a business owner and you know that content's part of that strategy to grow your game, you really won't think twice about investing in a tool that helps you speed that up and be more effective. So that weighs on me. That's more of a head decision than a heart decision. It's more of like the pragmatic side to where really great customers are. But ultimately, I would love for this to be something really anybody with a knack for writing can find a ton of value. We think it can over time still be very horizontal in that a lot of different types of writing can be done in it. But those are the two qualifiers for like who tends to be a very active customer.
Is there one sector that you find, most people who use type are sort of coming from? Is there one area?
No, that's the weird thing. I'd say there's some gravity on certain use cases, like marketing content definitely is a strong one. That runs the gamut from blog writing to social media to whatever, market emails. But just as strong are folks who are using type to write internal communication, like internal documents, memos, little, notes to themselves, even on like just helping to think through a problem that's kind of complex. So there's this is the toughest question, honestly, that there's no use case represents more than 20% of our users from the interviews I've done with customers. It's a long tail of writing.
So it's really all across really tricky. Board. Huh.
Yeah, it makes it very, very tough. But those would be a few larger categories, but they're still nowhere close to half our use cases.
When you talk to people, what are the main features they tell you they love the most? And is there something that they keep saying they want that we're kind of still waiting to get?
Oh yeah, the thing that I think folks can articulate but often struggle to find the right words for are just type's interface is built for writing. Mm-hmm. I just it's just built for writing. It's hard to explain, but it's this is what I would expect a writing tool to kind of look like, roughly speaking.
Right.
I'm not stuck just in a turn-based chat interface. It's not really lazily tacked on AI features onto an existing doc editor. It's the writing features and the AI features feel really nicely integrated, and I'm in control as the writer. So
you're ready to write. You're just focused in that environment. Yeah.
Yeah. You naturally. It's that's what the tool is encouraging you to do. Almost is what the interface feels like. So that's the ease of use and the document editor as something that's pretty well developed is this. I think the strong pull for people to do their work in type. The definite thing that I think almost all AI tools get a lot of requests for and none of them do particularly well are I want this thing to know more about me. In the case of writing, I want it to know my style very well. But when I'm using the AI, sometimes it just suggests stuff because it has no idea about my work, about me. If I ask it to draft something for me, it's not really in my voice. There's kind of knowledge and style tend to be two pretty strong requests that we get. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, it's something I would argue is typically lacking in most of these AI tools.
Yeah.
But in the case of writing style, I think tends to be a little bit more, learn my writing style tends to have a bit of a priority.
Yeah, that's a great point. And how much are you able to tackle that currently and just coming up? Because I do know that the models are starting to get some memory now, some base memory of, we know this, and this about you. But I think you're kind of right. It feels like the style aspect still remains a bit elusive.
Yeah, and I think it's elusive. We have a ton of competitors. Almost all of them have an explicit learn your style feature. Mm-hmm. But it's a huge sham and a total lie. It doesn't learn your style at all. I mean, I've tried every single one of these products.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, and you can assume why. Typically these features are give me a writing sample and then I'll distill it into a set of editorial instructions that capture your voice. Yep. And the next time you go to write something, I'll append that to the AI's prompt. Well, wouldn't it be nice if that's all it took, right? If Hemingway could just give you 500 words on how to write like Hemingway, and then every bit of prose you produce. No, it doesn't freaking happen that way. The question is, why doesn't that work? It doesn't work with humans. Why would it work with AI or whatever? I think style in voice is such a hard and complex problem to really get because how you write an email fundamentally is different than how you write, a stand-up set or whatever, or a screenplay. And yet there are similarities, right? You're typically not completely switching personalities between those two things. If you're a funny, personable person or whatever, your emails will be a bit more lighthearted and have this element of humor. But if it's a professional context, you're still going to be more professional than if you're writing a text to your friend or whatever. So your voice really changes between the medium that you're writing and the recipient. You shouldn't write jokes to the person who lacks the ability to laugh at them. You should meet them where they're at, right? You're going to communicate in a more direct, concise tone. But it's still going to have these like elements of your DNA. So this is a long-winded way of saying, no, we clearly have not figured it out. But it is heavily in R&D is what I'd say.
No, that's sort of, it seems like kind of the holy grail of this whole thing is us being able to write at incredible scale in our own distinct way without any sense that anyone else wrote for us or anything else. It's just purely our own thoughts and then augmented by the vast knowledge of AI. I want to ask you something else. Implementations, what's that look like for type? Something that obviously, we're seeing AI implemented across everything, Canva and all these imaging tools, and I'm forgetting some of them offhand, but video creation. Is that something that you're looking at having as plugins for type, or do you want to keep this as a purely writing interface and then people can go off elsewhere? Almost that, when they go to type, they know they're just writing. Or do you see a world where you're implementing these different tools, image generation and what have you?
It is definitely, I think, something that's super compelling. One thing that I think is potentially really interesting about AI and where a lot of these models are going is that it's like text to blank is the kind of medium, text to speech, text to video, text to images. And so it seems very natural. There could be a marriage of like a text editor, more or less, and these other form factors. That is super exciting for me long term. I think there's absolutely an opportunity to move into that. If you're going to write the screenplay for the next Star Wars inside of type, why shouldn't you be able to generate at least the storyboards there as well, or at least the AI generated concept scene that you may still go out and actually shoot, but at least would help you really hone what you're trying to do. That kind of frankly seems like a no-brainer over time, but I think the only way people will really use us today is if we just excel at one thing, and we're just, when you go to write and you feel that pain of like, you're trying to write something and it's hard, just type has to be the thing that comes to mind for you. You have to think like, this tool will absolutely solve my problem. I think that's how we earn our right basically to expand into other things. That's kind of how I've thought about it. So that long term, there seems to be like a great marriage, but I think we got to earn it by being the best at writing.
It makes a lot of sense. And in a sense, right now, if you're using, and I think this is what we're seeing, if you're using too many different artistic expressions, trying to accomplish too many artistic expressions in one swath, everything gets kind of watered down. You've kind of strung it together and you have this vague concept. Whereas here, okay, my copy, this is going to be the best copy I can possibly produce when I go to type. And then I can figure out whatever else I'm doing. But at minimum, I've got my messaging down as perfectly as one could, right?
Absolutely right. In the same way that if you have a really excellent design tool or whatever, that's where you're going to go when you need to just nail something, and it's got to be great. No horizontal tool may ever be, even with Canva, at a certain point, the usefulness drops off and you need to go over into like a Figma or I don't know, an Adobe product. And I think that's exactly right. The vertical tools win by knowing you'll get the best result in that medium, in that tool.
I guess it goes both ways, right? Like I'm sure somewhere, although I don't know this for sure, but I suspect somewhere in Adobe Premiere, there's like a note-taking section, but you wouldn't write your screenplay in that,
No, and it's funny. And like all tools have their bias, right? But I think a lot of people think of like, certainly a writing app is not that hard to build. It's text, images, and video is way harder. But I don't know, like, do you spend as much time editing an email that you spend editing an image? If it's important, I think you often do. Writing's actually really freaking hard. And I think no one's built a tool that totally solves for it yet. And that's what we want to do. And you have to only care about that, I think, to do it well. To your point, it can't be a little tack on. Like now Canva has a document product, but I'm sure some folks use it, but it doesn't, I've never felt the draw to write in there. It feels a little bit like a tack on. Visual design is their sweet spot. Why even kind of bother with I'm sure there's a strategic reason, but spiritually, why bother?
How long does it take you in the age of AI to write emails when you're getting back to people now? Do you feel like you're caught in an overthinking pattern, or are you just firing things off? Are you using AI much when you write an email, or is it just like, is there a distinction between the two? Because that's kind of an interesting one. It's the weird spot that exists between formal and informal. You want to impress someone with an email. You don't want to sound like a complete ridiculous idiot. Text is whatever. But then formal docs, obviously you use it. But email's this kind of odd middle child of the two.
I'd say I am 100% organic, all natural email writing when it's some, one-on-one basically correspondence. Yeah. But we sent one this morning, actually. We published a new video. We sent an email to our email list to go watch the video. And that's one where I wrote the draft myself, but then I dropped it into type, wrote it, I think it was a copy from our email client. I pasted it over into type. I started to tweak it. And that was one where I used type mostly to speed up the polishing process and the rewrite process. And it's funny because it didn't take me 5 minutes. It still took me a freaking hour to write that thing. Yeah. My guess is I was probably 15% faster, 10 to 15%, marginally faster. But what it did do besides that is I got a couple lines that I actually really liked, and a little couple details that I was like, that's great. And I wouldn't have thought of that. So I hopefully it elevated the quality slightly of the email as well. But yeah, it's definitely kind of a marginal, we can still sell a marginal improvement, but that's how it often feels, right? Okay, I was a little bit faster. That was very useful, but it's not, I can't quite just blink and it's done.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's, as we sort of zoom out a little bit, right? We're here into the very dawn of this AI era. As someone as a startup founder in the space, someone who's really jumped in full force, what do you see happen? I mean, not that any of us know, but what do you sort of see in your own guess, happening in the next 5 to 10 years? What does the world look like? Ask you a very simple question that that anybody could guess, but just curious to hear your thoughts, because I know we talked a little bit about this offline, and it's a pretty, there are a lot of directions where things could go right now, but where do you see the tech evolving just over these, 5 years is not that long,
This is another, question that I just can't fully wrap my head around because of all that's at play, and for all the reasons you can imagine, it'd be tough to really grasp, because I never think any total strong vision, radical vision, is ever 100% true. I don't think in 5 years, we've automated all knowledge work or anything like that some people genuinely believe. I don't think every software engineer is looking for a job in 5 years because we've automated them away. Mm-hmm. But similarly, I don't think we fall into dystopia. I don't think we, there's people even betting on the downfall of AI. It's a shiny toy like the internet was,
Beanie Babies.
It's Beanie Babies or whatever. And so that's, also I think false. My strong suspicion is that over a long, the 10-year timeline, things radically change. And we even have, what the iPhone is starts to feel antiquated, and there's new hardware we're using that utilizes voice in a way that's really powerful and surprising, that simplifies the apps that we use. And there's this intelligence layer between us and what we now interact with directly that is deeply embedded into everything that we use in our workflows. That's going to feel, I think, really alien and different. But I think I think this stuff takes longer than meets the eye, because it's a million details that have to get figured out, and not to mention 100 breakthroughs. So I think in 5 years, we just have a bunch of super powerful new apps that still kind of feel like the stuff we use today, but just way better and smarter. And we really look back on the stuff we use today as janky. But we're still pretty involved in using them. We're still they still kind of sort of look like, if we saw them today, we'd kind of know how to use them. And we're still in the driver's seat. But I do think as the intelligence, ramps or whatever, we're able to remove ourselves from more and more of what we do today without thinking twice. So that's not a great complete answer, but I think the world's a more optimized, better version of what we have today in 5 years, but starts to take a different shape in 10. So that's kind of my sense of the drift of where this is going.
I think it makes a lot of sense. Right, there's a certain point where we hit this exponential curve where everything is, where AI and these technologies are potentially, optimizing themselves without any involvement. But then there's this era where we're still involved and the tools are still somewhat separate. Like you're saying, we sort of have a world that continues to resemble the current world, and maybe just with new power that we didn't have before. It's pretty startling to imagine how fast this technology is moving. But then it's also weird when I think back, because I can go back to like you mentioned the iPhone. Like I can think about smartphones when we think about like 2008, seeing the first smartphone. And then we look at iPhone 16 and the current breed. And are they better? Yes, but it's not like a night and day. I mean, really, they're more or less the same devices.
Right.
Like you would recognize it. Someone in 2008 would go, "Oh, I get what that is." They would more or less understand it. The power has increased. The cameras have gotten better, but it's not a radical shift in form or factor yet.
That's right. And I think with AI, like one constraint it faces is there's a lot of tasks where you just can't be 80% good or reliable. You have to be 100% for it to be automatable.
Yeah.
You could think of, and obviously in high stakes work, that's very obvious, like healthcare or something like that. But I think it's true of even lower stakes things. If you had an AI that could respond to your text message you don't feel like responding to, but 20% of the time it said something idiotic, you would never use that app. Absolutely would never use that app.
You go check out, you've been dumped and you've said all these
exactly.
Like all your relationships have been just destroyed, your business contact. What? It was just only that little sliver of saying, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Russian roulette every time you hit the button. Like, who is this going to make my career or break it?
Yeah.
No one would use it. No one would use it. And that's, I think of self-driving cars as the clear example. We had, at the time, I think even plausible theories that, more like 6 years ago, that Teslas would be autonomous within, 24 months, that Waymo was on the verge of roaming the streets in every city. And certainly there was a lot of truth to the fact that progress had been rapid, but that's a game where, you just have to have an extremely high standard for success before you deploy it at a large scale. So I think that's the other thing. AI doesn't magically escape that. I don't think we'll use things that lack total reliability. And that's really hard. You have to invent your way out of that over a long period of time. So that's the other reason I think this probably ends up taking longer than the most, biggest believers might believe today.
Is the only exception the speed? Because this does seem like the fastest accelerating we've ever seen of technology, which is a weird thing to say, because on one hand, we're seeing the acceleration, those of us like you or me who are looking at it up close, but then I think the average person doesn't feel it so much in their daily life just yet. But those of us looking at it are like, oh my gosh, this is a tsunami, just looking at the improvements and the rate of improvement.
Yeah, there's something different in that respect. There's no doubt. Like, it's strange though. Like, I don't, what's a good way of putting it? It's like GPT-4 came out maybe, has it been like 18 months or at least 12 months or so?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
And I'm almost certainly underselling the new model that just came out, GPT-01 or whatever the 4.1 preview. Yeah. Yep. But it's funny. I've used it and it's like really impressive. But I've actually then gone and done a side-by-side with GPT-4 with like the same request, and the output's pretty. In the few cases I've been using it on, the end results actually has been similar. Now I'm underselling it because some of the requests I can understand how a one-shot technique would have been fine. And I believe the 50 researchers at OpenAI who worked on this are not idiots. I think they have a good reason why they're excited about it. So I am earnestly trying to learn. But the jump between GPT-4 and 4.0 feels less dramatic than the jump between GPT-3 and GPT-4.
That is true. That is true.
So that's the other
dramatic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's strange. Like that's the other, and this is more me maybe just trying to find my grounding, because it can feel impossible to keep up. But when I do like pulse check, like how radically more useful is the stuff than it was 12 months ago, sometimes that test, it doesn't really clear. But sometimes it does. So the point stands. It's very fast moving and tough to keep up with, but I don't know. It's worth just looking at your actual usage of the thing and seeing how that changes over time.
What do you think in this kind of acceleration? There's never been anything like this. What do you think young people who might be listening, young people who are looking to accelerate their own careers, what in the hell should they even be studying at this point? Even writing an essay has even just using type, it completely obliterates the conventional way we look at writing, communicating. critical thinking, etc. Not that these things are gone, but the paradigm has shifted if you want to excel.
I'm always extremely reluctant to give any advice that, I always know that you're often just sharing what you would do or what you did do. So I'm aware of that bias, but I think it's like, if you're a young person, it's like, do the same thing you should have always done. Either learn about something that's never going to change, or learn about something that is going to change, and then go work on that thing, because like either strategy can work. There's going to be some 20-year-old today who goes and runs a very successful, picks up the family plumbing business and does quite well for the next 40 years. That's going to happen even in the AI future, I think. But there's also going to be a 20-year-old who sees the oncoming wave of AI and decides to go into research and like makes the next breakthrough in 5 years and like contributes in that way. But I think either can work, and so much of it comes down to where is your natural draw. But maybe just that gap is going to open a little bit. You got to be more at the cutting edge of your field or of the technology or of where things are going. It's the middle that we've talked about, like runs the risk of getting hollowed out, or you just need to be aware of. So I think if you're in a field that's going to be impacted by this stuff and you can see how, it's super important to adopt it, work with it rather than against it, understand where it can be useful, like kind of master it in that way, and learn the skills on top of it that help you get the most out of it. Gain leverage insofar as you can. But I think there's just also going to be a lot of folks who, can find things that'll never change. And like, someone's going to start like an events business and do really well because people are always going to want to go to events. Real estate moguls will probably still continue to get built, so that's what I think. And I guess it comes like being a young person, at least for me, it's always been, you can never succeed at something that you're not interested in. So really try to understand what you're interested in and just take the brakes off and go for it. And don't let anyone, tell you what that should be. I think people can find passion in the most surprising places. And like, that's what gives you staying power in something, I think, is genuine, earnest interest. So insofar that you can point it, direct it towards something that's definitely going to change and you can be a part of, or that just won't, and you can ride that stability.
And just as we wrap up a little bit, it's kind of funny, we went kind of in reverse. We just jumped right into AI, into the tools and everything else. But maybe can you talk a little bit about your journey as a founder and how you came to the concept of Type, and just that journey? That's such a unique pathway in life to be an entrepreneur, such a unique way of thinking. How did you get from human to this?
I know, who really knows? Like, it's funny because it's always tough for me everything does look more obvious in hindsight, or whatever the expression is. The dots connect looking backwards.
Yeah, the dots connect after the fact, yeah.
And it's really true, because in college, I definitely knew that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I didn't really know what, but it took a lot of my ideas gradually drifted towards software, because like, the iPhone was about to be a thing, and like apps were becoming a thing. And so my entrepreneurial endeavors started to drift into software and technology, but I didn't know how to code. I didn't know. I was an econ major. So I actually hired someone on Reddit, which is the setup to what will be a bad story, a bad outcome, to build me one of my, ideas at the time. And I sent them essentially my life savings. It was like $1,000. It was like $1,500 bucks,
wow.
I think.
Interesting.
To build this website, which they promised to deliver 4 weeks later. Of course, what did they do? They like deleted the PayPal account where I sent the money, and like removed themselves from the face of the earth, and they stole my money, and they never delivered the website.
No. So I was like, entrepreneurial lesson, yeah.
Oh yeah, lesson number one: like, don't prepay a huge sum for you to a vendor you've never met,
right,
on a spec project. That many lessons in there that I had to learn that way. I was like, okay, well, I don't have any money now, so that sucks. But I do have a little bit of time. Let me just go on YouTube and like find anything I can on web development, or I guess at the time it was iOS development. And I just taught myself a little bit of programming, kind of became a self-taught hacker. And so by the time I left college, I had enough of a skill set in programming just to get by with hacking together kind of an MVP of something before I could actually recruit a founding team around it, or an engineering team who really had great skill. I could basically just vet my ideas a lot faster. And so that was my foray into being able to be an entrepreneur in tech. And I started a company not long after leaving school, worked on that for like 4 or 5 years. And that ended up having a bit of an exit, which was like a fun first ride, but it wasn't like, I always kind of felt like I really want to work on something that would make me never want to give up on it. Just like an area of interest of mine that just never seems to wane. And for me, that's always been writing and creativity. And so I've been like slowly finding my way towards building a product, building a company that's actually financially viable, hopefully, and makes sense as a product in a space that I care a ton about, which is writing. So that I've skipped a ton in the middle, but that eventually got me to type when GPT-3 came out. And actually, I will just quickly share. I was working on a different company that I had co-founded that in like 2020 that worked on helping to service writers. It's basically on-demand editorial support if you're a writer or on a team of writers, is the simplest way of thinking about it. And like it was very much a human kind of approach. And we GPT-3, not ChatGPT, the original GPT-3 model had come out in kind of like the AI research community. And I actually like cold emailed the founder of OpenAI, Greg Brockman, one of the co-founders. And I was like, yo, can I get access? And didn't answer. I just followed up a few days later. Hey, like I would love to check it out. Granted me access, got to play around with the early GPT models. And it wasn't really clear to me then what the use cases would be, but it was clear to me that this was groundbreaking and going to be really radical, and especially in some areas I was interested in. So I think that planted the seed for what eventually became Type. What's really the way in which a writer would want to work with this technology? And that's finally started to come into focus. So that's been my long-winded journey with the middle chopped right out.
But that's super interesting, though. So you always kind of knew you wanted to move in that direction of authorship and writing, even before you started seeing the huge acceleration in AI.
That's right.
Interesting. So
exactly
then
right.
Sort of converged everything. You sort of converged tech it with your already existing passion and entrepreneurial pursuits in writing as well.
Yeah, and the part that's missing from this story is in 2018, I had actually sent another cold email to the Allen Institute in Seattle. They have Paul Allen, who was Bill Gates' second-hand co-founder at Microsoft, had funded an AI research institute similar to OpenAI. Their goal was to build common sense reasoning, have AI that was like as smart as an 8th grader or something like that, which now sounds humorously unambitious, but was a huge, crazy bet.
Again, that was enormous. That would have been incredible. Yeah,
I know. It's like hard to believe. And they were total research institute. They were set up as a nonprofit, but they wanted to start an incubator that could spin off companies and basically find some inspiration and use of some of the research they had done, but actually get it into people's hands, make it useful. And so I joined them as kind of an entrepreneur in residence to help spin out a company. I was there for about just under a year. And what that did was give me a glimpse at where AI, this next era of computing, and I didn't see a ton in the language model world, although AI2 had done some interesting work there. But I worked on a text-to-speech product that could produce human-like speech that was really fantastic. It's called Well Said. It's now out, a very popular product. And I also looked at some like early image generation stuff, and I just saw the general trend. I was like, man, okay, it's going to take a little bit. I'm not a researcher, so I can't really push the ball forward on this stuff, but I'm basically keeping my ear to the ground because I think AI is going to have like a moment. It's not now, but it's coming. And when it does, I want to be ready for that. I want to apply it to something I care about. So that was the other kind of the AI strand of that story.
That's amazing, and it's kind of unique because I think you're right. As so many entrepreneurs, you sort of hear their story of just knowing they want to start any company in any field, and they're just kind of looking at where the opportunity is. But you always had a passion that kind of underlied the entirety of the process the whole time, it seems.
So, and I only found it just by doing stuff that I wasn't as excited about and feeling that grind, and then being like, hey, what do I really enjoy, and what do I think enough people struggle with to where there could be a business? It's not everything you love is going to make for a great business, but I think with writing, it's finally coagulated into some opportunities. So definitely a process.
So as we wrap up, any final takeaways for anyone, for our listeners, anything that you would want them to walk away with, if one little thing?
My takeaway, the thing that I feel like is most missing, or the thing that I think sucks. This is the thing that I think sucks about AI right now.
The official segment on this podcast. The thing
lead with this clip. I hope I say it very pithily. I think like a lot of people feel really excluded and like behind. And I think that sucks for a few reasons. One, it sucks to live in a world like that. Yeah. That sucks. I don't want like 10 nerds in San Francisco deciding the future for all humanity. That blows. Nobody wants
Terrifying
that.
prospect. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you've ever been to San Francisco, never, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and two is, yeah, it's just like it can feel overwhelming and just kind of brutal to feel like you're always behind or whatever. And what I would say is that I think this is a technology, specifically language models. Not everybody can become a researcher in it, but it's one of the first breakthrough technologies that everyone day one can interact with. And that to me opens up the chance for a huge number of people to contribute to it and to understand it from its earliest stages. If you wanted to work in, video or TV or, like you'd have to have real technical prowess to do that. With a language model, you can go type a message to it and see what it can do. So I think my takeaway for folks is just to like not worry too much about what's in the headlines, what the proclaimed capabilities of this tool is, what people are telling you it's useful for, and really just to go develop your own opinions by using it. It's just one of the only technologies where anybody can pick it up and start to play around with it. And very few people have figured out yet where this stuff's going to be transformative. So I think that excites me. I think it opens the door to more people, feeling a part of this. And yes, that's my hope, is just people pick this thing up, play with it, and come up with their own opinions about what it can do. Because I think they're genuinely going to be welcomed.
It's a great point. Yeah, there's so many exciting directions for this to go. Everybody, thanks for listening to Two Dudes in Gray Shirts Against White Walls. Stu, thanks for joining today.
This was a pleasure. Thanks for making the time.